Time travel plus system, early stage minor abuse of female protagonists, later stage female protagonists rely entirely on cheating, without fixed CP. What was the beginning of Chapter 1? You are listening at Novel Full.audio. As soon as Mu Ting regained consciousness, she was enveloped by a warm water flow. She quickly held her breath and dared not move around, barely opening her eyes to see a milky white image. Feeling her body gradually sinking, she panicked and waved her hands, only to realize that her right hand was tightly gripping a stone. Damn it! What thing? She didn't want to just let go and swam out of the water with all her might. Cough. Cough. She coughed violently a few times, then took a deep breath of the long-lost air. She's actually still alive. Hurry up. Kill her quickly. What? Kill who? Mushi looked at the source of the sound with a mind full of questions, the same white clothes and the same black head, one by one, just like copying and pasting. This witch hasn't died yet. Kill her. Don't let her run away. What kind of ghost is this? A group of people rushed towards the direction of the shepherd, and as the figure gradually approached, she finally saw their appearance clearly. The one in front looked good, while the one at the back looked a bit inferior. TSK. The ones behind are so ugly. The face of the handsome guy at the front became clearer and clearer, until there was a strong stabbing pain in her chest that pulled her thoughts back. She lowered her head to look at the hilt on her chest, then at the person holding the hilt, and opened her mouth as if saying something. The person was taken aback for a moment, got closer and wanted to hear what she was saying, but unfortunately couldn't hear it because Mushi had already passed out. Ling He, how are you? Has the witch died completely? One of the people on the shore asked. Ling He nodded and drew his sword back. Let's go, the task is completed. Do you want us to make a few more cuts? He shook his head and watched as the animal's body sank into the water until it was out of sight before flying ashore. Let's go quickly. Seeing that his decision had been made, everyone had no choice but to follow him and leave one after another. Who? There's an ambush, the person walking at the back suddenly shouted, with golden arrows piercing through his legs and falling heavily to the ground. Ling He turned around and wanted to save him, but was stopped by someone beside him. No way. Without waiting for him to refute, the person sealed Ling He's acupoint and carried him away directly. After they had all gone far, the three of them gradually emerged from the grass. Who went into the water to save her? The man in red spoke first. Don't expect me, I won't go. The other two looked at each other and said, we don't want to either. They really dislike this woman, and being able to avoid falling into trouble is already considered benevolent. I'll go. A cold voice sounded from behind. The man in red turned around and said, you are truly the most loyal dog of the shepherd's family. It's nothing else for us, let's go. The mocked man ignored him and jumped into the water without hesitation, searching for her figure. Young Master Rong. Could you please treat Mississippi? Rong Xian's bamboo door was kicked open by a man, and he stood in the courtyard with a medicine hoe. He looked up and calmly said to the visitor, bamboo door, 10 liang. The man held on to the cold body of the shepherd and knelt down straight. Rong Xianwei squinted his eyes and looked at the girl in the man's arms who was soaked all over. He reached out his slender hand and placed it on her neck. Breath out, there's no cure. He withdrew his hand and spoke calmly. Rong Xian is a straightforward person who never lies. So if he says he's out of breath, then it's really. The man stood up silently for a long time and walked out holding his gradually cold body. His steps were very slow, as if he had exhausted all his strength with each step. After Rong Xian put down his medicine hoe, he followed him. He doesn't like to interact with those people, but now that something big happens, it's inevitable for everyone to come together. When they arrived at the lobby of the main house, everyone had already taken their seats. She really died? The man in red approached Rong Xian and asked. Rong Xian frowned and took 2 steps back before answering, "My body is already cold, what do you think? Your Highness is in his own courtyard, and we are all responsible for being harmed by traitors." The young man sitting at the top said, "Sanshao, Qinga, Qinggu, you are the first to rush there." "I went there, isn't it a step slower?" The man named Sanshao spread his hands, indicating that it had nothing to do with him. The other 2 brothers exchanged a glance and remained silent. "I couldn't protect the young lady well, so I will go and get punished." The man holding the shepherd suddenly spoke, "I'll go find your majesty." "No way." The man in green clothes sitting on his left side stopped him in time. The man looked at him puzzled. "If your majesty finds out, our group of people will have to shed their skin even if they don't die," said the man in green. Sanxiao's fearless face began to change. "I forgot about this mess." He patted his forehead. "What should we do then? It's all cold through." "I suggest finding someone with a similar physique to replace him," suggested the man in blue. The crowd was lost in thought. "This is fine. I have a candidate here," Qinga suddenly spoke. Upon hearing this, everyone looked at him and said, "Who?" "The new artist from Hongluan Pavilion is called Xiaohua. Hongluan Pavilion is a famous song and dance hall, said to have a profound background. It only receives the distinguished guests they choose, and even does not give face to royal relatives." So, when Qinga mentioned it, everyone's expressions were quite intriguing. "Are you sure?" Sanshao asked. Qinga nodded seriously and said, "I've seen her before, she's 3 or 4 parts similar." When everyone was silent, Mu Gue woke up and opened her eyes in confusion. "Where is this? Why are these people all upside down?" She blinked hard and was just discovered by Qinggu. He shook his hand and tugged at Qinga's sleeve, "Brother. Scam. You're faking a corpse." Qinga turned her head and saw that it was indeed true. "She's awake." This sentence caught everyone's attention. The man holding her gently laid her flat on the ground, and Rong Xian walked over to squat down. He looked at her and sighed lightly, "It's a miracle that you can still survive like this." Mu Yen blinked again, and at this moment she could only blink, unable to move her body at all. "Lai Su, take the palace down to Rong Xian's courtyard," said the young man in white and with ink hair. Rong Xian walked out first, and Lai Su followed closely with Mu Yen. "Don't you think it's weird?" said the crowd, "Look at me, look at you." It is rumored that when His Highness was born, 100 birds sang together and colorful auspicious clouds spread throughout the sky. Such a peculiar person is not easy to die, and it is normal. The man in a blue brocade robe turned to the young man in white and said, "Since she has already woken up, this matter has nothing to do with me, so I will not accompany her." After speaking, the person casually shook his hand and left. Qinga, Qinggu will be fined 6 months' salary, and Sanshao will be punished with a stick of 50. Can you accept the punishment? Sanshao was obviously very dissatisfied, but he didn't say anything. Anyway, the punishment was just a decoration. Alright, they're all scattered. Chapter 2. Activation System. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Liesu brought the shepherd into the house, and before Rongxian could speak, he placed her on the bed. Rongxian opened his mouth and froze. He really hates people touching his personal belongings, such as the bed he sleeps on. Please. Young Master Rong. Lai Su pulled the blanket over and covered it for the shepherd before retreating to the side, leaving space for Rongxian. 50 liang. Rongxian reached out his hand to Liesu. Lai Su was stunned for a moment, then took out a black jade pendant from his arms and handed it to Rongxian. Is this okay? This was the only thing he could bring out at the moment. Reluctantly. Rongxian took the jade pendant and stuffed it into his brocade bag, then frowned and walked into the bed. He slightly bent down and met the 4 eyes of the shepherd. Rongxian waved to Liesu and said, "You, come over. What's wrong? Liesu approached and asked. Tear open her clothes. Lai Su was momentarily stunned and understood Rong Xian's meaning before following suit. Sigh. The blood on her chest dried up, and her clothes and flesh were pulled apart. Mu Ting's eyes were filled with stars, but the pain made her realize clearly that she was still alive. Miss, please be patient. Liesu's gentle voice rang out. Mushi shifted his gaze from Rong Xian to Liesu's face. This person is not bad looking, but compared to Rong Xian, he appears too ordinary and easily overlooked. However, this kind of him made the shepherd feel very at ease, and also made her less panicked about this unfamiliar world. Who are you, who are you? The shepherd's voice was hoarse and weak. Liesu's voice was filled with shock. Have you lost your memory? Sitting beside him, Rong Xian lost his mind and looked up at Liesu upon hearing this. The shepherd didn't speak again, just nodded slightly. You are the 9th princess, your majesty's only princess, Muji, replied Liesu respectfully. Pastoral, it actually has the same name as oneself. And what about him? She turned her head to look at Rongxian, who had always liked someone who was good-looking. Rongxian, your sidekick, replied Liesu in response. What? Mu Ting was a little excited and pulled at the wound, making her face look grim and painful. Liesu nodded earnestly and said, that's right. You have 9 sidekicks. As the words fell, the sound of system prompts rang out in Muji's mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host for activating the Sea King system. What thing? The expression of the shepherd was twisted. All characters appearing can be explored. All choices made by the host will change the ending of the story, please choose carefully. She heard a hint of wanting to be beaten. Wishing the host a happy and enjoyable time, after the system finished saying this sentence, it disappeared into silence. Mu Ting's eyes darkened and he completely fainted. It was not fear, it was excitement. She is really too excited. She had been looking forward to the miracle of time travel happening to herself since she was young. After making a wish for 20 years, it was finally fulfilled by God. Lai Sujian closed his eyes anxiously and shouted, Mississippi Rongxian. Come and take a look. After a diagnosis, Rongxian said, it's okay, I just fainted. After a busy period of work, the room quieted down. At night, the shepherd woke up intermittently a few times, her body burning hot and her head groggy. Someone kept wiping her body with a handkerchief. Although she couldn't see the person's appearance clearly, she felt that it was Liesu. She had a dream of living happily with a group of beautiful men, but they all had the same face, Rong Xian. Due to the eerie nature of the second half of the dream, it startled her to wake up. She opened her eyes and saw the blue bed curtain, and raised her hand. Well, she couldn't lift her hand at all. I opened my mouth, my lips were dry and cracked, and there was another burst of tearing pain. The door creaked open and Liesu walked in with a bowl in hand. Seeing Mu Yan's eyes open, she quickly walked forward and helped her sit up. Miss, please drink some water first. After that, she fed the bowl to Mu Yan's mouth. Sweet and clear water entered her throat, and Mushi's throat became much more comfortable. She leaned against Liesu's embrace and asked, where is this? Liesu continued to hold his bowl and said, Ronggongzi's spring returning pavilion. Your name is Liesu, are you my personal guard? Liesu replied, yes. Your Highness, are you feeling better? A young man in white walked into the door, and the shepherd looked at him, good-looking. But it's not as beautiful as Rongxian. Miss has lost her memory. Young Master Rong said that it would take a few more months to recover the injuries on her body, but this memory is difficult to retrieve. Lai Su sighed. The young man walked to the bedside, lowered his eyes, and spoke softly to Mu Gui, it's not an important memory. If you forget it, forget it. But your Majesty's place. The young man shook his head and said, Your Majesty has never summoned His Highness a few times in a year. When His Highness recovers from his injuries, he will tell His Highness again. Anyway, Your Highness cannot see any difference. Liesu nodded. Since Your Highness is fine, let's move the strings down first. The person walked very quickly and quickly disappeared from Mu Yan's sight. Is he also my sidekick? Mu Yan's face regained some blood color. Liesu sighed and said, Prince Wanxian is in charge of the mansion, and all the young masters are under his management. Mu Ting nodded and said, I have some questions that I need you to answer. Liesu replied, Miss, please speak. Am I not Your Majesty's only princess? Why does it seem that Your Majesty doesn't really care about me in the mouth of Bianxian? After hesitating for a moment, Liesu slowly said, Actually, before you were 10 years old, Your Majesty doted on you the most. But later, Empress Xian passed away, and Empress Yu gave birth to a prince, who was posthumously honored. You don't like her, so you always argue. In a fit of anger, Your Majesty expelled you from the palace. So it's a princess who lost her favor, so who are these sidekicks? Liesu replied, It was arranged for you by the Empress. They are all dragons and phoenixes among people, which is beneficial to you. But I don't think they really like me, do they? Why do they still want to stay here? Asked the shepherd puzzled. Liesu thought for a moment and said, It seems that there is a contract that binds them and they cannot leave. Contract. The shepherd was a bit curious, what kind of contract could control so many people? It's also amazing. She also felt a little more at ease. Since they couldn't run away, she could take her time to strategize and not be in a hurry. Miss, please ask me again later if you have any questions. I'll make some clear kanji for you just after you woke up. System. 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 Dear host, please let me know if you have anything to say. The sound of the system echoed in her mind. Do I have any privileges to use now, or do I have any mission items? You have 3 opportunities to view character information. Mu's eyes lit up. Check the information of the accommodation. Liesu, male, age 18, martial arts score 65, skilled in hidden weapons. Loyalty 100, gone. The host level is not enough, only these can be viewed. Do you want to continue using the query function? Chapter 3. You like this, great. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Muji lay in bed for several days, during which only Li Juku was there to take care of her. The days of eating are indeed very comfortable, but she is lying on the verge of mold. Manic. Liesu, the shepherd shouted loudly. What's up, miss? Lai Su pushed the door in. I want to take a shower. Take a shower. I stink, shouted loudly. Liesu will go and prepare for you immediately, Liesu said before turning and leaving. As the door closed, Mu Yan took off his shirt and the wound on his chest had scabbed, but it was unsightly. After applying Rong Xian's medicine, it hardly hurts much thinking of this, Mu Ting's heart warmed. He doesn't really dislike me, does he? After Lai Su returned, he took Mu Yan to the side of the bathtub. This place is exclusively for her and is usually locked. The mist shrouded, the fragrance of flowers filled the air, and the shepherd slowly walked into the water. The warm water enveloped her, and she remembered the suffocating sensation of drowning when she was unconscious. Her legs softened and she almost slipped. Miss, I'll be guarding behind you. Don't be afraid, Liesu gently supported her. She nodded and sank into the water, revealing only a small head outside. Muji turned his head and Liesu knelt with his back to her, his right hand resting on the hilt of his sword at his waist, constantly alert. She let out a long breath, and now she can take a bath with peace of mind. Lai Su. Mu Yan rubbed his long hair and said, Do you know the identity and background of Rong Xian? Only your mother knows about this, Liesu replied softly. Upon hearing Liesu's answer, Muji felt somewhat disappointed. Seemingly sensing her low mood, Liesu added, the identities of the 9 young masters are special, and their information is recorded and buried together with the former empress. The former empress once said that this was done to protect them, unless they voluntarily reveal their true identities, otherwise they cannot be detected. I see. In that case, we can only use cheats. System, I need to search for information about Rome Xian. Rome Xian, 19 years old, has excellent medical skills, an indifferent personality, and a slight cleanliness fetish. Thank you. Can you provide some useful information? You don't need to say it, I can see it all. The host level is not enough to view all information. The shepherd gritted his teeth. Okay, I'll endure. By the way, don't I have a maid? Lai Su paused for a moment and said, the 9 young masters have extraordinary appearances, and it is inevitable that there are suitors, so there are no maids in the mansion. Oh. The shepherd responded. It seems like the servant hasn't seen it either. Lai Su paused again and said after a while, Miss, you used to spend money recklessly. Your savings in the mansion have long been depleted. So. Am I a poor person now? The shepherd almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. Can he still play happily? Miss, don't worry, the expenses in the mansion are shared by several young masters, explained Liesu. You don't have to worry about food and clothing. What the hell is this? Hey! The shepherd roared in his heart. How can you still guide me while eating soft rice? Mississippi. Lai Su called twice, but the shepherd did not respond. He turned pale and quickly turned around. A pair of moist little hands covered his eyes and said, You. Close your eyes. Lai Su followed his words and closed his eyes. His long eyelashes swept through his palms, and a tingling sensation spread from his palms to his entire body. Muji let go of her hand and confirmed that Liesu was closing her eyes. She quickly pulled off the clothes hanging beside her and put them on her body, using skillful techniques. 3 years of Kozer experience would come in handy at this time. After getting dressed, she walked towards the door. Until crossing the threshold, the person behind remained motionless in place. Liesu, follow me and take me to see my bedroom. After receiving instructions, Liesu opened his eyes and walked forward. The pastoral mansion was very large, with numerous corridors and pavilions. Lai Su led her 7 or 8 twists and turns all the way, and she finally arrived when she was dizzy. The host was the first to open the door, and the room was spacious with few beautiful decorations. The only one that looked valuable was probably the big bed. The bed was covered with clean bedding and pillows, clearly taken care of by someone. Miss, wipe your hair first. Lai Su took a cloth from somewhere and gently wiped Mu Yu's shiny black hair. The shepherd quietly allowed Liesu to serve, while he himself pondered how to conquer Rongxian. Miss, it seems that you have become different, Lai Su suddenly said while wiping. The shepherd looked up at Liesu in confusion. Liesu smiled and said, You have become much more lively. So, what was I like in the past? Asked the shepherd. Before. Lai Su's hand paused as if recalling, Miss used to not talk much or laugh much. Isn't that just a fool? Lai Su stared blankly at Mu Shi, his eyes somewhat panicked. Mu Shi continued without any concern, since I have become lively and outgoing now, I will definitely make Rome Xian like me. Liesu didn't answer. He looked at Mu Shi for a while, and finally lowered his gaze and said, This kind of young lady is very good. Well, what Liesu said is very right, Mu Jin touched Liesu's head. But I'm a bit hungry, let's solve the problem with my stomach first. Lai Su said, at this point, the young masters should also be having meals. We should be able to catch up now. Then hurry up and leave. If you're not enthusiastic about eating, you might have a problem with your mind. So the two hurriedly ran to the dining room. Mushi was stunned as soon as he entered the gate, and all 9 young masters were there. This can be considered her first formal meeting with them, and she couldn't help but regret it. Such a rash rush would damage her image. Your Highness is here, sit down and have dinner with us. He waved his hand and gestured for Mushi to sit next to him. The shepherd looked at the table full of dishes, swallowed his saliva, and said, then I'll be more respectful than obedient. So she sat down on the right side of the winding string, and on the right side of Mu Ting was Qin Wu, who could be considered an acquaintance. Rong Xian sat directly across from him, and after Mu Shi took his seat, Lai Su also found an empty seat to sit down. Your Highness, eat more vegetables, said Wan Xian gently as she picked up a chopstick of vegetables for Mu Ting and put them into a bowl. Mu Ting obediently responded, although she really wanted to eat meat. Rong Xian put down his chopsticks and looked at Wan Xian, saying, I need to leave Beijing for a while. Where are we going? The shepherd raised his head with a brush. Rong Xian said, collecting herbs. Then. I'll go with you. Mu Yen quickly stated. With a slight frown, she tried to dissuade, saying, Your Highness is still weak. Isn't Rong Xian skilled in medicine? Being by his side is the safest, okay. Upon seeing this, Wan Xian sighed and said, all right. But your Highness must be careful of your safety and not harm your body. I know now, the shepherd obediently replied. Rong Xian put down his chopsticks, got up and left the table, walking towards the door. Qingge and Qingwu looked at Wan Xian at the same time, who shook his head at them before they withdrew their gaze and continued to eat. Chapter 4. Retrieving Old Objects. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Mushi hurriedly grabbed a few bites of food and ran out, and Liesu naturally followed suit. After waking up, this little girl has become different. Sanshao looked at the man in the blue brocade next to her and smiled. Yueshi, what do you think? Yueshi didn't elaborate, but the meaning was already very clear. Qingge also nodded and said, if she keeps doing this, then we can also live with respect like guests. I'm afraid it won't work, she said, shaking her head. Qingge and Yueshi exchanged a glance and said, what's going on? Twisted the strings and smiled bitterly, but remained silent. Sanshao patted Wan Xian's shoulder and said, all right, don't worry about the sky. It's okay if she leaves, we don't have to guard this dilapidated house. Let's go drink. After saying that, he turned around and strode towards the door. Everyone left the table one after another, winding their strings and looking at the three people who had been silent all along. I also need to leave for a while. One of them interrupted Duan Xian's next words and nodded slightly to apologize, I'm sorry. Wan Xian opened her mouth and finally uttered, have a safe journey. The person smiled and nodded. I should go home too. The seemingly younger boy also stood up and walked outside. Wan Xian watched as the figures left for a long time without saying anything. They were brought here one by one and forcibly tied up with Mu Yen. Saying no resentment is too false, but suddenly everyone has to go their separate ways. This feeling is really uncomfortable. She let out a low sigh and picked up the dishes to continue eating. On the other side, Rong Xian drove his carriage away from the city gate. It must have been too late for Mu Ting to find him after finishing his meal. Fortunately, there was a train staying there, and he excelled in likeness skills. Soon, he stopped the carriage outside the city. The carriage stopped, and Rong Xian lifted the curtain and poked his head out. What's up? Well, we agreed to go together, didn't we? Mu Yen blinked his eyes. Rong Xian frowned and said, when did you say that? Mushi. When we eat. Rong Xian was stunned for a moment, then said indifferently, Miss Mu, you have already escaped danger, so. I don't care. Anyway, I'll rely on you. The shepherd didn't wait for his consent and got on the carriage directly. Liesu, mount a horse. Seeing Liesu approaching, the groom jumped out of the carriage with great vision and gave him a seat. So, Liesu obediently drove the carriage away. I don't like to be in a room with strangers, said Rong Xian calmly in the carriage. You should know. I heard from Lai Su that you were from Qianfu in 5 years, so I'm not a stranger, right? Mu Yan sat across from Rong Xian with a sweet smile on his face. Rong Xian closed his eyes and remained silent. Mu Xi sat obediently across from him, holding his cheeks in both hands and looking at him. Beautiful. It's really beautiful. This is what we call beautiful food. With this thought in mind, the accompanying carriage swayed slightly and soon fell asleep. Rong Xian opened his eyes and watched as she lowered her head, revealing a fair neck. With just one shot, she died instantly. Rong Xian slowly extended his right hand, and the silver needle on his fingertips flickered with a cold light. It stopped again less than 2 inches from Mu Yan's neck. He cannot breach the contract. Rong Xian took a deep breath and placed his hand on his knee. Outside the car curtain, Lai Su silently withdrew the black dart in his hand. Young Master Rong, don't act recklessly. Lai Su's voice came lightly, with a calm tone and no ripples. Upon hearing this, Rong Xian only snorted lightly and lifted the car curtain to breathe air. The smell of fat and powder emanating from Mu Yan's body made him feel a bit nauseous. The two of them didn't speak anymore, and the carriage jolted all the way until it reached the foot of the mountain before stopping. Rong Xian got off the carriage first and walked up the mountain. After he left, Lai Su tied up the horse before lifting the car curtain and said, "Miss, here we are. Are you there?" Mu Yan rubbed his sleepy eyes and asked vaguely, "Is this the foot of the mountain? Why don't you drive up?" "Driving?" Liesu was taken aback. "It's just driving a carriage, why don't you drive a carriage up?" said Mu Ting, his head clearing up a bit. "The mountain road is rugged and difficult to walk on, so I can only get off and walk." Lai Su's expression was somewhat puzzled. After all, the young lady in the past was spoiled, and she definitely couldn't do mountain climbing. Oh. That's right. Mu Ting suddenly realized and quickly lifted the curtain of the car to get off the carriage. Looking left and right, he couldn't see the person he was longing for. He wondered, where's Rong Xian? Why hasn't my handsome freshman disappeared? Liesu sighed helplessly and said, "Young Master Rong has already entered the mountain." "Oh, let's catch up quickly too," said the shepherd, rushing into the gap between the trees. "Hey miss!" Liesu shouted and immediately chased after him, "Be careful of the stones under your feet." "Gotta be careful of your feet too." Mu Ting didn't turn back, just waved his hand backwards. Naturally, I couldn't see the slightly raised corners of Liesu's mouth. Rong Xian's purpose in entering the mountain this time is just to stay away from the chaotic affairs of the Mu family, so he is not in a hurry to search for medicinal herbs. He walked slowly along the mountain road, occasionally picking 1 or 2 small flowers casually, very leisurely and comfortable. However, as he walked, Rong Xian's footsteps suddenly stopped, and he turned his head to look in the direction of the past. "It's really troublesome." Rong Xian's lips curled up without a hint of warmth, and he turned around to continue walking towards the mountaintop. In no time, he disappeared into the dense forest. On the other side, Mu Xian is breathing heavily. Lai Su, let's rest in place." She gasped for breath and said, "I can't walk anymore." "Okay." Lai Su took off his coat and laid it flat on a mossy stone, then helped her sit down. "Liesu, thank you. Lai Su is the Miss's personal guard, and protecting the Miss is the responsibility." "Stop." Muji waved her hand to interrupt Lai Su Biao's loyal speech. She moved her buttocks and patted the empty seat next to her, gesturing for him to sit down. Liesu hesitated for a moment in silence, but still chose to sit at her feet. In the depths of the mountains and forests, Rong Xian pushed open the decayed wooden door in front of him, and a musty smell came in. He couldn't help but frown, take a deep breath, and gradually adapt to the odor. He looked around and saw some books and scrolls scattered on the ground. There were some bottles placed on the table. Rongxian reached out to take one of the bottles, which was covered in soil. He gently wiped it a few times and put it into his pocket. Then his gaze fell on the wooden box not far away, which was slowly opened and contained only a pair of scrolls. Rongxian placed the wooden box on the ground, his fingertips trembling as he wanted to pick up the scroll. He vaguely remembered that it was a portrait inside. The scroll was gently unfolded by Rongxian, depicting a lively young girl with long hair draped over her shoulders and a stunning appearance. He stared intently at the portrait, seemingly lost in some kind of memory. Chapter 5. My heart pleases you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rongxian sat on a large stone in the mountains, holding a herbal medicine in his hand, focusing on checking its quality. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice and lifted his head. A little girl wearing a floral dress came to him, smiling and asking, "Hey, medicine fool, haven't you been lonely in the mountains all this time?" Rongxian looked up into the distance, shrouded in clouds and mist, and the air was filled with a faint scent of grass. Then he turned to the little girl and stared at her with warm eyes. "You see, the herbs here are very fresh and of good quality," said Rongxian, waving the herbs in his hand. "You haven't answered my question yet," the little girl frowned and glared at him with some anger. Rongxian let out a light sigh, put down the herbal medicine in his hand, and said seriously, "I have been living here with my master since I remember. I have never been out of this mountain forest before. I have been used to it for a long time." The little girl thought for a while before finally muttering, "But your master is no longer here." Rongxian lowered his eyes and put the newly collected herbs into a basket, carrying them on his back. "Let's go, it's time to go back." He patted the little girl's shoulder and walked forward. And she stood still, her feet heavy as if she had been filled with lead, unable to move at all. The little girl hesitated for a long time and mustered up the courage to say, "Medicine nerd, would you like to come with me?" Rongxian's footsteps only paused for a few seconds before continuing forward without making any response. Seeing him not stopping, the little girl gritted her teeth and quickly chased after him, holding on to Rongxian's sleeve and refusing to let go. "I don't have time. Idiot, I like you. Why don't you leave here with me? Why don't we always be together?" The little girl spoke hastily and incoherently. Rongxian slowly pulled back the sleeve of his clothes pulled by the little girl, turned his face, and said, "Ian, you're talking nonsense again." Rongxian finished speaking softly and walked away. The little girl stood still, her eyes turning red, and in the end, she reluctantly shouted, "Rongxian, you're a big idiot. I hate you." Upon hearing the sound, Rongxian turned around and found that Ian had disappeared. Looking around, there were no signs of leaving. Suppressing the unease and fear in his heart, he carefully searched around again. But it is still in vain. He took a deep breath, calmed his emotions, and ran towards his wooden house. She must have secretly run back, deliberately making me anxious, right? She used to like to tease herself like this before. Rongxian comforted himself time and time again, ran to his doorstep, pushed open the wooden door, and the courtyard was empty. Ian. Rongxian rushed into the house and found it tightly closed, just like when they left. His heart skipped a beat, as if it was about to pop out of his chest at any moment. "Where are you?" Rongxian murmured. Her mind kept ringing with the last words she said, "I hate you," and her heart twisted into a ball, her expression dazed. "Look at Liasu. There's a wooden house here. This wooden house seems to have been uninhabited for a long time and is not very safe. Miss, please don't go in yet." Rongxian suddenly turned his head and looked out the door, murmuring, "Ah Yin. That's it." Rongxian. Mu Ting saw Rongxian sitting on the ground in a disheveled state and hurriedly ran towards him. He helped him up and asked with concern, "Rongxian, what's wrong with you? How can you sit on the ground properly?" I'm fine. Rong Gongzi. Lai Su stood behind Mu Gui and nodded slightly at Rong Xian. I'll go take a bath and clean by the river first. Don't follow me, he said, breaking free from the support of the shepherd and walking outside. Upon seeing the situation, Muji wanted to follow up, but was stopped by Liesu. La Su. Mu Shi grabbed La Su's hem and looked up at him. Why are you blocking me? Young Master Rong just said, let's not follow. If you approach like this, you may offend him again, Lai Su explained. The shepherd nodded at the words and said, yes. Then let's wait for him here. Mushi grabbed Liesu's wrist and walked outside. Rong Xian came to the river, took off his shoes and socks, and stepped into the water barefoot. The cold and piercing river water soaked his whole body. Rong Xian hugged herself, enduring the cold and trying to control her emotions. For some reason, he seemed to have seen Ian's figure in a daze just now. Is there some kind of connection between Mu Yan and Ayin? No. Impossible. Maki's life in the past was almost semi-transparent. She had never left the main city and they had never seen her before. Rong Xian shook his head and put aside those strange speculations. He picked up a handful of water and sprinkled it on himself, the cold feeling sobering him up a lot. Young Master Rong, I have left the clothes for you to change on the shore. Rong Xian turned around and responded. Lai Su put down his things and respectfully retreated. After waiting for Liesu to leave, Rong Xian walked up to the shore and picked up the clothes placed aside. It's a set of snow-colored brocade clothes, clean and tidy. After changing his clothes, he opened the scroll of the painting, just like his memory. The girl's face in the painting was blurry and couldn't be seen clearly. Even so, Rong Xian carefully collected it and hid it in his arms. I will definitely find you, wait for me, Rong Xian whispered. On the other side, Mu Gui left and other people were eager to see Rong Xian returning. Liesu, he hasn't recovered for so long. Is something going to happen? Lai Su shook his head in the direction of Rong Xian and said, young Master Rong has the ability to protect himself. Why don't I go check and confirm it? Mu Yen said and ran out. Upon seeing this, Liesu sighed helplessly and followed behind her. In the emerald green, the whiteness was very eye-catching. Mu Yen recognized the white figure as Rong Xian at a glance, and she quickened her pace to run over. Rong Xian was picking a wild mountain ginseng, and when he looked up, it was Mu Yen running towards him. He was very fast and quickly ran to his side. Rong Xian. Are you okay? Mu Yen gasped for breath as he spoke. Rong Xian. What can I do? He put the mountain ginseng he dug into a cloth bag, then stood up and looked at the shepherd in confusion. Why do you always follow me? Because, I'm happy with you. Mushi said with a smile, showing a sweet smile to the other person without hesitation. Liesu's face stiffened and he turned his head to one side, not looking at the expressions of the two. Mushi, please stay away from me, Rong Xian said word by word. With so many husbands, can't we still satisfy you? Mushi's smile disappeared and he said with some frustration, but you are also my husband. Mushi. Rong Xian said coldly, if it weren't for. I would definitely have killed you. Rong Xian. I'll take a step ahead, you better go back. Rong Xian said as he bypassed Mu Yen and walked towards the distance. Liesu looked at the silent little person in front of him, feeling a little distressed. In the past, the young lady would not express her preferences directly like this. The only initiative she received was a cold rejection. Liesu's lips moved, and before he could say words of comfort, Muji spoke first. Since he doesn't like me following him, let's go. Where are we going? Liesu's mind had not yet reacted. Idiot, go home. Chapter 6. Grab a meal. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Inside the carriage, the shepherd appeared to be sleeping lightly against the wall, but in reality, she had already begun to calculate who to choose for the next goal. She is not a person who will give up. While iceberg beauty is good, it takes a lot of effort and may not necessarily lead to results. She really doesn't have that much patience. Miss, let's move the carriage away. Wouldn't it be too good, said Lai Su, driving the carriage in a soft voice. If she were to fall asleep, she wouldn't be able to hear her. Are you trying to say that I'm not kind? The shepherd lazily spoke. No, miss. Liesu quickly denied. Doesn't he want to quietly collect herbs? I'm trying to help him. Besides, it's not far from the city, let's come and pick him up in a while. Mu Yan's tone was the same as usual, but Liesu couldn't help but shiver. He didn't understand why the young lady's attitude towards young Master Rong changed so quickly. Of course, this is not something he should consider either. He only knows to be more careful around the lady. The carriage continued on and soon arrived in the city. The shepherd commanded Lai Su to sell the carriage and exchange it for 5 taels of silver before strolling down the street. This is her first time shopping in this world, and it's quite fresh. There are many tea houses and taverns on both sides of the street, while on the roadside there are some vendors selling snacks and small things. She walks and looks at each stall, stopping for a while, and everything she sees is very novel. Originally, the appearance of the shepherd was extremely extraordinary, attracting passers-by to frequently turn their heads and gaze. Miss, what do you want to buy? Lai Suqian whispered in Mu Qian's ear. I'll just take a quick look, there's nothing to buy. Besides, I don't have any money right now. What can I buy in such a bustling place with only 5 taels of silver? Mu Yan smiled with a hint of shyness in her pocket. Miss, should we have dinner first? Suggested Lai Su. Well, that's okay too. Upon receiving Muji's answer, Liesu stepped forward to lead the way and headed towards a nearby tavern. Muji followed him honestly, and soon her gaze fell on a wooden sign. Yuan Laiju. She whispered these 3 words, then lifted her heel and stepped into the tavern. What would you like to drink, sir? The waiter approached and asked Liesu. Let's find the shopkeeper. Please wait a moment. The waiter led them to the seats by the window on the 2nd floor and turned to call out. Mushi sat by the window, watching the people coming and going downstairs outside. Not long after, a man walked down from the 3rd floor, wearing a blue long shirt with ink hair tied behind his head, with a delicate face and a gentle expression. Miss, this is Yu Gongzi, Liesu whispered. Oh, the shepherd replied perfunctorily without turning his head. Yushi sat directly across from her and said, What would your highness like to eat? Upon hearing the words your highness, Mu Gui turned around. She looked at Yueshi carefully for a while before giggling and saying, You look so beautiful. Your highness has praised me, how can I compare to young Master Rong? Yushi nodded slightly, with a distant smile on her face. Hee hee. Somewhere, you all have your own unique features, they look good. They all look good. Mu Yan felt an inexplicable sour taste, awkwardly chuckled a few times, and then looked at Yushi. So. Can we serve the dishes first? Well, of course you can. Yueshi smiled and nodded, waving to the waiter and whispering a few words before the waiter nodded and stepped back. Is this shop owned by you? It looks pretty good. Mu Yan looked around. Yes, Yueshi smiled faintly. So you should be very wealthy, right? What does your highness want to say? Is it possible for me to invest in your store? I won't interfere in your business, as long as I receive monthly dividends. Mu Shi stared at Yushi with an expectant expression, afraid that she would refuse. Yushi was slightly stunned, so how much savings does your highness have? 5 liang. Yueshi frowned and said, Is your highness joking with Yueshi? Mu Yan's face turned red and very embarrassed. Your highness has good piano skills. How about coming to my place every 3 days to play a tune of 5 taels and 1 piece? Mu Ting was stunned, which was good for her, but unfortunately she didn't know how to play the piano, so she didn't answer. Liesu spoke angrily, "Miss, how noble your status is. How could you do such a thing? La Su." Mu Shi stopped La Su and then looked at Yu Shi. "Sure, but I haven't played the piano for too long. Can you give me 2 days to get familiar with it?" "It's okay, I'm not in a hurry." Yu Shi smiled and nodded, watching as the dishes were presented one by one. Yu Shi then ordered someone to bring a pot of clear wine before getting up and leaving. "Miss, you really don't want to play the piano here, do you?" Liesu asked anxiously. "Yes, what's the problem?" Mu Ting picked up his chopsticks and picked up a handful of vegetables and put them in his mouth. "Do you think face or food and clothing are more important?" "Well." Lai Su choked and said in a muffled voice after a while, "Miss, don't worry, I can." Mu Shi put down his chopsticks and sighed, "Liesu, I'm different from before. Can you feel it too, right? Since I woke up that day, I've been feeling very insecure. I'm afraid of being abandoned." "Miss, Liesu will always follow you," Liesu said, half kneeling at the feet of the shepherd. "You get up first." Mu Ting quickly reached out to help him stand up. Mississippi. Mu Yen took a deep breath and said, "In this vast imperial capital, I only trust you, Liesu. I want to make money, earn a lot of money. Even if I encounter danger in the future, I have enough confidence to protect myself and the people around me." After a long silence, Liesu nodded and said, "Okay, Liesu will definitely help Miss fulfill her wish as soon as possible." "Thank you." Mujin patted Liesu's shoulder, smiled at each other, and quietly enjoyed the free lunch. After eating, the two of them left Fate and came to live. "Miss, do you want to go back to the mansion?" said Lai Su, walking ahead with Mu Gui following behind. The shepherd immediately said, "Let's go back to the mansion." There is no guard in front of the princess's mansion, so Lai Su stepped forward and pushed open the door. Mushi took the lead in walking in. Although it was only half a day outside, it still gave her a feeling of returning home. At this moment, Wan Xian was lying on the rocking chair in the front yard teasing the flower cat. When Mu Yen and his companions walked in, they immediately left the cat and sat upright. "Your Highness. How did you come back?" Wan Xian was a bit surprised. According to theory, it would take at least a month for Mu Yen to come back after that person. "Isn't it okay for me to come back early?" Mu Yen said as she walked up to Wan Xian and picked up the cat. "It's so cute. Is it your pet?" A wooden nod on the string. "What's its name?" The shepherd pinched the meaty paw of the cat. Wan Xian glanced at Mu Yen, then at the cat in her arms, hesitated for a moment before spitting out 2 words. "Reunion. Reunion. It's so cute." The shepherd touched Tuan Yuan's furry head before reluctantly placing it in his arms. Wan Xian looked at the cat in her arms and changed her gaze, saying, "If your highness likes it, just take the reunion with you. You don't need to be polite to Wan Xian." Chapter 7. Feilai Caiheng. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "Although I really like this little guy, it's still better to stay by your side," Mu Yen said with a smile. "By the way, is there a Qin in the mansion?" "Yes, there is." Huan Qian asked again, "Why does your highness suddenly want to play the piano?" "I found a job at Yueshi's place, all I need to do is play the piano," Mu Yen added after finishing. "And it's okay to go once every 3 days, giving 5 taels of silver for each piece of music. Isn't that very cost-effective?" The plucked string indicates not knowing what to say. Seeing the appearance of Huan Xian, Mu Yen couldn't help but laugh and said, "You wouldn't want to say something noble, no?" "No, you can't say something like that, right?" After a moment of silence, Wan Xian replied, "Your highness's actions will damage the dignity of the royal family." Muji's smile disappeared and he said, "Royal. What does it have to do with me? Have the palace sent anyone to comfort me during the time I had an accident? He doesn't care about my life or death, why do I care about his face? Your Highness. Wan Xian tried to dissuade but didn't know what to say. By the time he regained consciousness, Mu Gui had already disappeared. He looked at Liesu and said angrily, why didn't you stop His Highness? You allowed her to act recklessly. Liesu shrugged and said, who can stop what your Highness has decided? Besides, your Highness's current situation is actually not bad. Yushi is not very sensible anymore. I'll go find him to argue, sighed Wan Xian. After speaking, he hurriedly left holding the flower cat. As soon as Liesu stepped into the room, Muji leaned in and said, I was so angry just now that I forgot to ask where the Qin is. Is the string still there? I'll go find him. Liesu shook his head and said, let's go. Ah. The shepherd scratched his hair in distress, alas, we can only wait for him to come back. Liesu said, perhaps your Highness can go find Prince Chinga. Really? The shepherd's eyes were bright, and he was about to pull Liesu and run outside the door. Your Highness, please be calm. Lai Su held her down and took a teapot from the wooden table, poured a cup of water, and handed it to her. I'll go take a walk for your Highness. The shepherd drank the water in one gulp and patted his chest, saying, you're the best, so please. Your Highness, rest assured, said Liesu as he walked out. Wan Xian rode the carriage to Yueshi's private yard and knocked on the door. The servant had just opened the door and hadn't seen the visitor clearly, so Wan Xian walked in directly. Hey! Young master, you can't force yourself to break through. A lazy male voice came from inside the room, Xiao Ming, step back. After hearing this, the servant respectfully arched his hand towards the room before retreating. Yushi, I have something to talk to you about. Bian Xian pushed the door in directly. Yueshi, dressed in a light blue shirt, sat leaning against the soft couch, with one leg bent and knees tilted. He held a ledger in his right hand and supported his forehead in his left. He lifted his eyes and glanced at Wan Xian, then lowered his eyes and said, are you here for her? With a cold snort, she walked straight to the wooden chair and sat down. You know those people are eyeing your Highness, but what's the point of deliberately causing His Highness to appear? Upon hearing this, Yishi's flipping of the pages paused for a moment, then continued to look down at the account book in her hand and casually said, who said that's your Highness? She's just a pianist I specially invited from the Hongluan pavilion. Wan Xian was momentarily stunned, then reacted and said, stealing a beam for a pillar. Yushi finally looked up at him and said, there is a surge of undercurrents in the palace. If you want her to live, you have to plan ahead. After pursing her lips and pondering for a moment, she immediately asked, did you not inform His Highness about this matter? Yushi casually spread out her hands and said, no, I'll just knock you unconscious and take it away. Is this really feasible? Said Wan Xian, frowning uncontrollably. Yushi sneered and said, that was chosen by me personally. If you don't trust me, you can plan it yourself. Alright, you go quickly. Seeing that he didn't react much, Yueshi waved her hand and urged him to leave. You. Wan Xian gritted his teeth and stared at him, but could only turn around and leave for a while. After watching Wan Xian leave, Yushi breathed out a deep breath and murmured to herself, it's always exceptionally calm before the wind and rain come. In the evening, Mushi sat on the small swing, lost in thought. She was wearing a light purple gauze skirt, with long black hair hanging down to her waist. Her slender and delicate waist was bound by a purple and white ribbon, showing a graceful figure. The shepherd's feet were together, and he supported the swing with both hands, swaying slightly. Lai Su brought Qin Gu, and when the Qin Wu brothers entered, they happened to see such a scene. The setting sun shone on Mu Yan, casting a golden halo over her, highlighting her fair skin, distant eyebrows, and a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. I never saw your Highness so beautiful before. Qingwu's voice fell into the ears of Mu Gui, not too big or too small. She turned her head to look at the two people next to Liesu and said, "You're here, sit down, sit down. Point your right hand towards the stone bench on the side and greet." Liesu approached and said, "Miss, why are you looking like this?" Mushi looked up at him and said, "Are you talking about hair? I just washed my hair and it's not completely dry yet." Qingge placed the qin on the stone table and looked at Mu Gue, asking, "This phoenix tail qin has already been brought, is your highness ready?" Mushi walked up to the stone table and reached out to touch it. A delicate phoenix was carved at the end of the qin, and the strings were of good quality and had an excellent touch. At a glance, it was known that it was priceless. "Is it really good to give me such a high-end thing to practice?" Mu Ting scratched his head with some embarrassment. "It's okay," Qingge said. "Okay, let me give it a try." Mu Yen smiled sweetly and sat at the stone table, reaching out to play with the strings. Zheng zheng, a piercing and unpleasant noise rang out, and Qingge stood up with a dark face. She pulled Mushi up from the stone bench, put the qin in a cloth bag, and then carried it on her back. "Qin Gu, let's go. I'm leaving now." "I haven't practiced yet," said Mu Qian in confusion. "This qin in your hand is like a waste of it," Qingge said as she walked out. Liesu quickly caught up and said, "Young Master Qin, you promised me." Qingge stopped and turned to look at him, saying, "Go south 50 miles from the princess's mansion and buy it yourself. Don't bother me." The blue brocade bag was smashed at the foot of Liesu by Qingge. Qin Gu passed by Liesu's side and hesitated for a moment before taking off the green brocade bag from her waist and handing it to Liesu. Seeing his face ironclad and unresponsive, he looked at the figure that had already turned and disappeared. He ran up to Mu Ting, took her hand, and stuffed the brocade bag into her hand, earnestly instructing, "Your Highness, nothing can be forced, and you must not show off your strength." "Okay," the shepherd nodded and agreed with a smile. Qin Gu ran away with a red face, but suddenly turned around the corner and shouted, "If there are 107 water alleys, Your Highness, if you have any difficulties, you can come here to find me." After speaking, he ran away like he was running for his life. "It's quite heavy," said the shepherd, picking up the brocade bag at the foot of Liesu and weighing it. Chapter 8. Qinxing Cangjiao. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Soothing Liesu's emotions, it was already dark. The shepherd lay in bed happily counting the silver and said, $1. $2. There's a whopping $16. She put all the large pieces of silver in her hand into the blue brocade bag, took out a pink embroidered shoe, stuffed it in, and threw it under the bed. The remaining broken silver was put into a green pouch and stuffed into the chest, saying, "It feels so good to have money." She placed her hands on her chest, with a happy smile on her face, and slept until dawn. "Miss, have you woken up?" The sound of Liesu coming from outside the door interrupted Mu Yu's dream of becoming rich. She opened her eyes and covered her chest, sitting up for a few seconds before asking, "What time is it? What time is it?" "The water has already been brought, Miss is ready to wash up." Liesu stood by the door with a copper basin, waiting, and added, "Young Master Yu and young Master Wan Xian are both waiting for you to have dinner." "Oh. All right." Mushi quickly got up from the bed, dressed neatly, pushed open the door, and Liesu walked in with water. "Moon. What is he doing here?" Mushi rubbed his face with a cloth towel and made a questioning voice. "This is also the home of Prince Yu," replied Liesu with lowered eyes, standing behind Mu Yu. "Oh, that's right. Why don't they eat first?" Liesu didn't answer, and after she finished wiping her face, he took out the cloth towel and copper basin. Mu Jianwan finished her hair bun and walked out. She saw Liesu waiting outside the door with a wooden face as usual, and said, "All right, let's go over." The two of them walked into the living room, one in front and one behind. Yushi was leisurely drinking tea, holding her right hand on her forehead as if she was lost in thought. Your Highness has woken up. Yueshi smiled at Mushi's appearance and said softly, come and taste this green fish. It's fresh, tender, and delicious. All right. The shepherd naturally sat in the position next to Yueshi. Huan Xian regained her senses and glanced at Yushi, then asked lightly, what are you here to do today? Naturally, we are dining together with His Highness. Yushi smiled gently, with elegant and graceful behavior, looking particularly pleasing to the eye. I still have some things to do, she said as she stood up and turned around to leave. 2 words drifted from afar, hypocrisy. Mushi frowned and said, what's wrong with Bianxian? Did you make him unhappy? I didn't know, I guess I was too busy to sleep, explained Yueshi, reaching out to refill Mu's cup of tea. Your Highness, taste this. Yushi twisted a flower-shaped pastry and leaned towards Mu Yan's lips. Mu Ting swallowed the meat in her mouth in a daze, opened her mouth and bit into the pastry. Suddenly, Yushi's fingers brushed past the corner of her mouth. She looked up at the moon. The person seemed oblivious and smiled lightly, retracting his fingers to continue giving food to the shepherd. Mushi felt tempted, but her intuition told her that this person was definitely not as simple as it seemed on the surface. She shook her head and denied her previous idea of conquering Yueshi. Your Highness doesn't like to eat these pastries? Yueshi asked with concern as Mushi suddenly shook his head. No, the pastry is delicious, but it's not appropriate to put it together with the dishes on the table. After finishing a cup of tea and seeing that Liesu was also ready, Mu Qian said, Liesu, let's go. Liesu nodded and said, okay. However, Yueshi stopped her and said, where is your Highness planning to go? By a Qin, Mu Ting paused and turned to look at him with a smile. Yushi was slightly stunned and then said, coincidentally, I'm also going to the piano company. What are you going to the piano company for? Asked the shepherd curiously. I heard that a new batch of good pianos have arrived in Kyoto recently, so I want to go and see them, said Yueshi with utmost sincerity. The shepherd nodded without delving into it. After all, free carriages are for nothing. Your Highness, please wait a moment. I will go and pick up the carriage, said Liesu Chaomu before retreating. Yueshi watched as Liesu's figure receded, and seemed to unintentionally say to Mushi, Your Highness seems to have a closer relationship with Liesu than before. Is there anything? Mu Yan asked with a confused expression. Yushi smiled silently, but secretly pondered to herself. Is Mu Shi really stupid? Or are you hiding your clumsiness? Upon arriving at the Qin shop in the south of the city, Mu Shi walked in with a novel expression on her face, while Yushi said to Lai Su, who was tying his horse, wait outside. Although your Highness values you, you should also understand the rules yourself. Lai Su paused in his footsteps and bowed to the moon, saying, yes. In the elegant room on the second floor, next to the window, a young man dressed in blue and vigorous attire watched as Yueshi and Mu Shi were selecting from the piano shop downstairs. He couldn't help but say, TSK. This woman is quite skilled. Yueshi even volunteered to be her follower. What? Are you envious? Another man smiled. Envy. Do you think a clumsy woman like her deserves my envy? The man chuckled lightly and said, words are deceitful. Yueshi walked towards the Qin stand and picked a few, then turned around to see Mu Yan without saying a word and asked, Your Highness, can you choose the Qin you like? These all look similar, I don't quite understand, said Mu Yan, shaking his head. What do you think of this one, Your Highness? Said Yueshi as she caressed the strings. The body of the Qin is full of jade color, shining brightly. It looks pretty good, nodded Mu Yu. She pursed her lips and said, then I will give it to Your Highness. So valuable, exclaimed the shepherd in surprise. Yueshi smiled and said, Your Highness's birthday is approaching, I'll just give you a gift in advance. Zichio sat in the elegant room and could clearly see the interaction between the two downstairs through the window. Although I didn't say anything more, the number of times I held the teacup increased. Oh, I'm jealous. The person across from Zichio looked down at him and saw two familiar figures. Zichio gave him a fierce glance and said, "Don't talk nonsense." Okay, don't say anything," the person pursed his lips. "You keep watching, I'll go down first." "What are you going to do?" Zichio called out to the person. The sound was not too low, and coupled with the quiet atmosphere in the piano room, it actually caught the attention of the guests downstairs. Everyone's gaze coincidentally turned to Zichio upstairs, only to see the person standing motionless, as if already seated. A wealthy young man downstairs laughed and shouted loudly to the upstairs, "Mr. Qin, you are hiding a delicate woman in a golden house." Everyone turned their heads to look at the person shouting, shocked. Mr. Qin, who has not been a woman for many years, turns out to have a good relationship with Longyang. As soon as she finished speaking, Zichio suddenly stood up and leaned out half of her body, shouting angrily at the person, "If you keep talking nonsense, I'll tear your mouth apart." At this moment, Mu Yan stood downstairs with his arms wrapped around his hands, looking at Zichio. In an instant, their eyes met, and Zichio's face turned red. He coughed awkwardly twice. "All right. Lin Xiao, please don't bully me, this little friend. He has a thin skin, Qin Shou smiled and made up the scene upstairs, while the other guests burst out laughing with kindness. Chapter 9. Going to Qin Ziguan again. You are listening at novelfull.audio. All right. Lin Xiao smiled a few times and waved his hand to continue strolling downstairs. Everyone also dispersed in search of fun. Mushi withdrew his gaze and said to Yueshi, "Have you chosen it? Let's go." Yushi waved and the servant approached, wrapped the qin and took it out. Mushi also followed the servant and walked out. Seeing her leave the piano company, Zichio sat back in her seat with a casual smile. As soon as Yushi came out, she saw Mushi standing on tiptoe with a handkerchief to wipe Lai Su's sweat. She even angrily said, "You're such a fool. Don't you even know to wait under the tree for such a big sun? Do you know that this will cause heatstroke?" Seeing Liesu standing there staring blankly at him, Muji suddenly felt a bit embarrassed and said, "Ah. You can wipe it yourself." Then he reached out and put the handkerchief in his hand, hiding inside the carriage. Liesu looked at the handkerchief carrying her body fragrance, her heart pounding and the corners of her mouth rising uncontrollably. Just seeing the cold gaze cast by Yueshi in the distance, I quickly put away my expression and lowered my head. Yushi walked closer with a cold snort, ignoring him and instead sat directly in the carriage. "Go back to the mansion." Lai Su got on the carriage and swung his whip to drive the carriage towards the princess mansion. "Yueshi, today I am still very grateful for the qin you gave me. It's like sending charcoal in the snow." Mushi immediately hugged the qin as soon as he got in the car, not even opening the cloth bag. Obviously, he loved it very much. "Your Highness, you don't need to be polite," said Yueshi, flipping through the book on the cushion without looking up. Mushi chuckled and said, "This qin must be very expensive, only 100 liang. Ah. So cheap. Gold. It's so close, I almost thought it was something I could afford," Mu Yan thought. Yueshi looked up and said calmly, "Your Highness has been a bit obsessed with money lately. Are you interested in any young master or servant who needs money to redeem himself?" "So." The shepherd pointed to himself, "I bought a waiter before." Yueshi responded indifferently. "The money has been spent, what about that person? Isn't there only 9 of you in the mansion?" Yueshi looked up at the words and said, "Your Highness has forgotten. Your money is not enough and you can't redeem it." After hearing this, Mu Yan's face immediately turned black like the bottom of a pot. So the money was spent, but the person didn't take it away. What's the point? I'm a princess, and I can't even take a fence or a tiled house. Yushi's tone remained faint. You are a princess who is not valued. A basin of cold water poured from beginning to end, extinguishing her indignation. Okay, when I didn't say it, Mu Yen leaned against the car wall in frustration. The carriage was moving slowly, and Mu Shi became increasingly angry as he thought about it. Suddenly, he slapped his leg and Yushi's hand holding a book shook beside him. Yushi, I've made up my mind, I'll go now. Mu Shi suddenly got stuck. Where is the waiter from? Yushi glanced at her and said, Ziguan, what does your highness want to do? Of course, I'm going to get the money back. Mu Ting looked as if it was natural. Yueshi sighed and said, Your highness, stop making trouble. How can you tell me not to make a fuss? It's clear that they're not being kind about this, said the shepherd. I've spent so much money, my family has emptied out, and I can't afford to buy a servant. This is not just about slaughtering me. I don't want to be a scapegoat. Either repay the money or give it to someone. Are you planning to forcefully grab it? When the time comes, the higher authorities will blame His Highness for taking responsibility, Yueshi reminded. I'm really speechless. What has this princess identity brought me? Ah. I'm really angry. Yushi coughed lightly and said, Your Highness, calm down. The rules of the world are like this. Whoever has power can make rules. A destitute princess is no different from an ordinary woman to some extent. I know. But I can't swallow this breath, I can't bear it. As soon as Mu Yen finished speaking, the carriage suddenly stopped. What happened? Yushi lifted the car curtain and asked. Liesu respectfully replied, The carriage ahead is the lord of the Qin pavilion. Qin Guanzhu. Mu Ting was slightly stunned. Are you from Ziguan? Yes. Speaking of Cao Cao is here. Since that's the case. Mu Yen turned his head to look at Yushi, you go back first. Then you. Yueshi hesitated a bit. Oh my. Don't worry, the shepherd waved his hand. There's a train staying here, I'm very safe. After thinking for a while, Yueshi finally compromised and instructed Liesu to protect the shepherd before leaving alone. Get on the bus, Royal Highness Princess. Qin Shou opened the curtain and extended his hand to Mu Xian. How could it be you? The shepherd was a bit surprised, and the owner of the piano shop who had just been sitting in the carriage. Qin Shou chuckled and said, It's rare to see His Highness go out. He specially prepared a carriage to welcome him. May I have the honor to listen to a song together? Qin Ziguan, the entrance hall is cold. The extravagant decoration highlights the extravagance behind it. Mu Gue followed him up the third floor and stood at the door of the room, hesitating slightly. Qin Shou turned around and showed a questioning expression. Here. Why don't we stay in the lobby? The veiled decoration and inexplicable incense in the room made Mu Ting feel uneasy all over. She always feels that this room is not very serious. Qin Shou was stunned for a moment and smiled faintly, Okay, then I'll follow your highness. In the outer room, the servant offered tea, water, and fruit, and the two sat across the table. Mushi asked Liesu to move a stool and sit on his left side. Qin Shou picked up the tea and leaned back in the chair, looking relaxed and lazy. Didn't it mean listening to music? Qin Shoumin took a sip of tea and said with a smile, Don't worry. Tonight, it happens that Ziteoer is on stage to offer a dance. Your Highness, why don't you stay and take a look? Ziteoer is the third-ranked beauty in Qin Ziguan and one of the 3 major money-making trees. She has a soft and beautiful appearance, and her figure is even more delicate and boneless. Do you want to pit my money again? Mu Yen also took a sip of tea and asked. Qin Shou smiled and said, Your Highness, how can you say this? You used to make a lot of money from me, right? Haha. Qin Shou laughed twice, Your Highness, have you finished eating and want to go back on your word? Boss Qin, what you're saying, ha ha ha. Mu Ting chuckled a few times, you should have heard about it too. I drowned a while ago, and after waking up, my mind hasn't been very good. Ah. Is there such a thing? Qinxing looked surprised. Yeah. I don't remember many things, as the doctor said. It's difficult for me to recover my memory. If I could see more people or scenery I've been in contact with before, maybe I would remember. So can Mr. Qin show me my consumption records, which are just my account books? So, Qinxing pondered for a moment. That's okay. Your Highness, wait a moment, let me go and collect it. Okay, thank you. After Qinxing left, Lai Su said, Miss, checking the account books is not very useful, I'm afraid there won't be any problems. It doesn't matter, I didn't think I could get the money back, I just wanted to see how outrageous the accounts were. Lai Su sweated, Mrs. Focus is really special. Qinxing went back and forth, followed by a dozen or so people, each holding a stack of booklets on a tray. Your Highness, please take a look, he said. Chapter 10. If you don't want money, someone will take it away. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Mushi casually took a booklet and flipped through it, feeling a thump in his heart. Oh no. The writing here is different from what she learned before, and now she is truly illiterate. Seeing her stunned, Qinxing smiled and said, Your Highness, can you see any problem? Mushi put down the booklet and took a deep breath. Can I take these back with me and read them slowly? Qinxing waved his hand with a smile and asked everyone to step back, saying, Okay, I will send someone to your mansion later. The shepherd nodded in gratitude. After everyone retreated, a young boy dressed in a dark gauze walked up with a pipa in his hand. After bowing to the two of them, he knelt on the carpet, lowered his eyebrows and eyes, and played the strings. The clear and pleasant music immediately circulated in his ears. Mushi closed his eyes and listened carefully for a while, then opened his eyes and found the young man looking at him with a smile on his face. With his eyes facing each other, Mu Lin smiled at him, then withdrew his gaze and turned to stare downstairs. Your Highness, what do you think? Qinxing asked. It sounds quite nice, said Mu Gui with a nod. Qinxing laughed heartily and said, If your Highness likes it, then he will be yours tonight. He stood up and pretended to leave, but leaned down next to Mu Gui and whispered, We don't accept any money. You are really a kind-hearted person. The shepherd thought silently. After Qinxing left, the young man obediently walked over and knelt at the feet of the shepherd. Don't. Mu Ting helped him and pulled his chair, giving him a dry smile. Sit down, then. What's your name? My name is Shireen. Shireen nodded with a smile and then had nothing to say. Seeing her discomfort, Shireen blinked her big eyes and said, Let me help your Highness press your shoulders. You just sit there, don't move. Mu Ting suddenly raised his tone to stop his movements. The attendant shrank in fear and nodded timidly. How old are you? The shepherd's voice broke the silence. The attendant blinked and said, 15 years old. Then the two fell silent again, and the attendant picked up the pipa again to play. Mu Ting listened to the strings and felt a little drowsy, unable to stop yawning. Miss, you're tired, let's go back. Lai Su couldn't help but comfort him from behind. Your Highness, will the attendant take you to rest for a while? The attendant stopped plucking the strings with her delicate jade hand. The shepherd nodded and followed the attendant to his room. The room was not big and decorated very simply. Seeing her scrutinizing the room, the attendant took out a big red mattress from the small cabinet and timidly said, This. Clean. Shireen, thank you, this. Mu Xian took out the brocade bag and took out a small grain of silver, and handed it to Shireen. Take it with a little heart. The attendant was stunned for a moment before taking the silver and bowing down to bow before retreating out. The red mattress is laid on the bed, which is the most eye-catching color in this room. The shepherd lay on his back, and the scent of sunlight still lingers on the mattress, which smells very good. Column accommodation. I'm here, responded the bedside resident. As night fell, the layers of red lanterns outside the building were lit up, and the servants were busy greeting the incoming guests. At this moment, Ziguan was finally coming to life. As soon as I left the room, I saw the attendant waiting outside the door. With a smile on his face, he led her to Qinshou's exclusive position. Upon seeing Mu Gui's arrival, Qinshou casually said, "Just in time, Noah, it's starting. Shi Tower has come out." Qinshou's voice fell, and countless cheers and screams came from downstairs, followed by a string of cheerful drums. Shi Tower was dressed in pink, with her long hair tied up in an emerald green jade hairpin. Her handsome and extraordinary face was adorned with a faint smile, and her expression was gentle. He walked slowly onto the stage, holding a fan in both hands. Accompanied by the beat of the drums, he began to dance gracefully, with a light and graceful posture. After the dance ended, Shi Tao turned around and was about to step down. Then all the guests got up and rushed up, creating a chaotic scene. Qinshou waved and the guards skillfully dragged the crazy guests out. Seeing this scene, Mu Yan couldn't help but click and say, "Blue face is a disaster." "Your Highness, don't worry." Qinshou approached him and lowered his voice quietly. "Shi Tao will come soon." Mushi. When did she say she wanted to see Shi Tao? But before she could explain, Shi Tao was surrounded and protected by guards, coming to her side. "Long time no see, Your Highness." This person's voice was as gentle as his appearance, both inside and outside. "Ah. Good, long time no see." Mu Ting nodded awkwardly and then asked Qinshou, "What are you calling him up for?" "Your Highness, isn't he here to redeem Tower?" he said gently. The shepherd was once again confused. "Boss Qin, aren't you teasing me? I'm so poor now. What should I redeem him for? Besides, when did I say I wanted to redeem him? Your Highness, don't you like Tower anymore?" Shi Tao looked at her with grievances in her eyes. "Last time Your Highness said to go home and take silver to redeem Tower, but I waited for 3 months and Your Highness never appeared. I really had no choice but to come on stage and perform." His words were filled with tears, causing pity. "I've lost my memory," said Mu Yan with a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Your Highness, don't you want any more peaches?" Mushi. "You can be considered a pillar at least. I really can't afford to redeem it. I'm also quite short of silver now." Qinshou chuckled beside him and added, "If Your Highness really wants to take him away, then I will make an exception and only need Your Highness to pay an additional 500 taels of silver." 500 taels. Can you kill me? Your eyes look like I can take out 500 taels. Mu Yan gritted his teeth. "Your Highness, can you offer a price?" Qinshou continued to ask. "I only have 5 taels on me, there's no extra point left." Qinshou shook his head and said, "It's too few. Even the eunuchs are priced more than that." Mushi. "So you should know that I'm not here to redeem people." Qinshou calmly said, "I know what Your Highness wants, but it's really not possible. You don't have money, if you want someone." Qinshou continued to shake his head and said, 5 taels of silver, I can't even buy a servant." Mushi. Suddenly, the attendant whispered, "Your Highness, redeem me. I only need 100 taels of money for selling my body, and I will make up for the 90.5 taels myself." Shi Tower widened her eyes and said, "Attendant, are you crazy? How could anyone spend money to redeem themselves for someone else?" The attendant looked at Qinshou and said, "Master." Mushi also stared at the attendant. The young man's figure was thin and obedient, with a hint of perseverance. Qinshou nodded and said, "Okay, you've already thought of it, attendant." He nodded firmly. So no one asked Mu Yan, so she took the silver from the attendant and gave her the deed of sale to Mu Yen. Even when she left the Ziguan, she was still confused and her mind didn't turn around. Dou followed Qinxing out of the building to bid farewell, without saying a word throughout the journey, just looking at Mu Gui with a complex expression. Before leaving, Qinxing said to the attendant, "If you encounter any difficulties, you can come back at any time." The attendant nodded with a smile and said, "Thank you for your kindness, master."